Throughout history, some crimes have remained so mysterious that they continue to disturb people even decades later. What makes these cases especially unsettling is simple. The killers were never identified. Communities were left frightened, families were left without answers, and investigators were left with questions they could never solve. Tonight, we look at 3 real serial killer cases that remain unsolved to this day. Let's begin. In the quiet countryside of Bavaria, in southern Germany, between the small towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen, there once stood an isolated farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck. Surrounded by open fields, dense woods, and a considerable distance from the nearest neighbor, the property belonged to the Gruber family, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and her 2 children, Cecilia and Josef. The family lived a secluded but steady life, relying on farming, livestock, and manual labor, typical for rural Bavaria in the early 20th century. But in the months leading up to the murders, the Grubers experienced a series of events that, in hindsight, formed a clear pattern of intrusion. Andreas Gruber reported hearing footsteps in the attic, even when he believed no one should have been there. Keys to the house went missing, not misplaced, but removed in a way that suggested deliberate interference. A newspaper was found inside the home from a regional area the family had no connection to and did not subscribe to. And perhaps the most unsettling incident was recorded in detail by neighbors. Footprints appeared in freshly fallen snow, leading directly to the farmhouse, with none leading away. These incidents were not rumors. They were reported by neighbors, recorded in later police statements, and referenced in official post-crime investigations. Despite this, no formal inquiry was made at the time. Rural authorities had limited resources, and unexplained noises or small thefts were often dismissed as ordinary hardships of isolated farm life. On March 31, 1922, the situation changed irrevocably. Based on evidence later collected, investigators concluded that the killer, or killers, used sound to lure family members into the barn. The theory that the perpetrator imitated the cry of an animal came from the layout of the barn, the absence of forced entry, and the sequential placement of the bodies. It appeared as though each victim walked into the barn voluntarily, possibly expecting to deal with livestock. Inside, they were attacked with a mattock, a heavy farming tool common throughout Bavaria. Forensic notes preserved in the original case files describe the blows as severe, consistent, and delivered with significant force. The order of the victims indicated methodical action rather than chaos. Inside the house, investigators found the maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived at the farm only the day before, and the youngest child, Josef. Their deaths showed no signs of struggle, suggesting they were killed quickly and without warning. But it was what happened after the murders that turned the case from a tragedy into one of Germany's most perplexing criminal mysteries. Multiple neighbors later testified that in the days following March 31st, smoke was seen rising from the farmhouse chimney. This meant fires were being tended. Additionally, livestock had been fed and cared for long enough that none appeared neglected when authorities arrived. Partially eaten meals were discovered in the kitchen and living quarters. These details, documented in sworn testimonies and police paperwork, strongly indicate that the killer stayed on the farm for at least several days, continuing the family's daily routines to avoid drawing suspicion. There were no signs of robbery. Money remained in the home. Personal belongings were untouched. Investigators searched for fingerprints, but early 20th century forensic methods were limited. And the farm environment with its dust, livestock, and open structures made preservation difficult. Over the following decades, more than 100 suspects were identified and questioned. This included neighbors, former farmhands, distant relatives, individuals with known disputes with the Grubers, and Victoria's rumored partner, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. While some suspects appeared promising, each investigation eventually collapsed due to lack of physical evidence or contradictory witness accounts. The case was reopened multiple times, most notably in the 1990s and early 2000s, when modern forensic methods were reapplied to preserved artifacts. Yet even with advanced techniques, no conclusive DNA evidence could be retrieved, due to contamination and age. A significant discovery came decades after the murders. The mattock used in the attack was found hidden in the attic, the same attic where Andreas Gruber claimed he had heard footsteps months earlier. This detail strengthened the theory that the perpetrator had been inside the home prior to the murders, familiarizing himself with the layout and observing the family from within. Despite the enormous amount of attention the case has received, the identity of the killer has never been established. Historians, criminologists, and investigators tend to agree on a few key points. The killer was almost certainly familiar with the family. He likely knew the property well. He showed no signs of panic or hesitation, and he had the confidence to remain at the farm for days, performing everyday tasks while 6 victims lay dead. This combination of knowledge, patience, and emotional detachment points to someone closer to the Grubers than a passing stranger. A century later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most thoroughly examined unsolved cases. The original buildings were torn down in 1923, but the evidence, testimonies, and case files have been preserved. Despite countless theories, interviews, and modern analyses, the truth has never been uncovered. New Orleans is known for its music, culture, and crowded nightlife. But for a period of about a year, the city experienced a series of violent attacks that left residents terrified and investigators overwhelmed. Between 1918 and 1919, an unknown individual began entering homes late at night. The method was consistent. The intruder used a chisel to remove a panel from a back door or simply forced entry. Once inside, the attacker used the occupants' own household tools, most commonly an axe, to assault them. The killer never stole money, valuables, or personal items. There was no clear pattern of revenge, robbery, or personal conflict. Many of the victims were Italian immigrants or grocers, which initially led police to suspect organized crime or racial targeting. However, later cases involved families with no Italian background, weakening that theory. What remained clear was that the houses targeted had no meaningful connection to one another, suggesting the intruder selected them at random or based purely on opportunity. Physical evidence at the scenes provided almost nothing. No clear fingerprints were found. The murder weapons were typically axes taken from the victims' own homes. There were no reliable eyewitnesses, only brief descriptions of a tall figure dressed in dark clothing. None of these accounts matched well enough to form a consistent profile. Then, on March 13, 1919, the New Orleans Times-Picayune published a letter claiming to be from the Axeman. Whether the letter was genuinely from the killer has never been proven. However, its content had a measurable impact on the city. The writer mocked the police for failing to catch him, referred to himself in dramatic supernatural terms, and included one unusual statement. On the night of March 19th, any home playing jazz music would be safe. Historical reports, including newspaper archives, confirm that many households and businesses responded seriously to the message. Bars hired additional musicians. Families played records throughout the night. Across the city, jazz remained audible until morning. No attacks occurred that night. Whether this was coincidence, intentional manipulation, or unrelated remains unresolved. Afterward, the attacks resumed sporadically. Despite increased police presence, patrols, and neighborhood vigilance, the intruder continued to evade capture. Investigators at the time considered several possibilities: a local resident familiar with the city's layout, a transient laborer or traveling criminal, a person targeting grocery stores intentionally, a killer acting without motive, selecting victims randomly. None of these theories were ever confirmed. The final known attack attributed to the Axeman occurred later that year. Then, as suddenly as the crimes had begun, they stopped. The individual responsible was never identified, and no credible suspect was ever brought to trial. Today, the Axeman case remains one of the most studied, unsolved serial killer investigations in the United States. The combination of inconsistent evidence, the questionable letter, and the abrupt end to the crimes has left historians and criminologists with more questions than answers. One fact remains: whoever the Axeman was, they disappeared without leaving a trace, and their identity has never been proven. Few unidentified killers in American history have drawn as much attention or left behind as much verifiable evidence as the man who called himself the Zodiac. Operating primarily in Northern California from 1968 to 1974, the Zodiac's known crimes and communications created one of the most complex investigative cases in U.S. criminal history. Police agencies have officially confirmed him in 5 murders and 2 attempted murders. However, in letters mailed to local newspapers, the Zodiac claimed he had killed as many as 37 people, a number that has never been corroborated by physical evidence but remains part of the extensive discussion surrounding the case. His confirmed attacks followed a strikingly consistent pattern. They involved couples sitting in parked cars, often in remote or dimly lit areas. The attacks were sudden, unprovoked, and conducted with either firearms or knives. At the Lake Herman Road crime scene in December 1968, investigators recovered shell casings, tire impressions, and footprints left in the dirt. These were documented thoroughly, and the casing markings were later matched to his next confirmed shooting at Blue Rock Springs in July 1969. Despite this, none of the physical evidence pointed to a specific suspect. What set the Zodiac apart from other violent offenders of the era was not only the brutality, but the deliberate and sustained communication that accompanied the crimes. Starting in the summer of 1969, he mailed letters to 3 major newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. These letters, authenticated by handwriting experts and verified using unreleased details from crime scenes, included coded messages, threats, personal statements, and references to earlier attacks. He signed many of these letters with a distinctive symbol, a circle crossed by a vertical and horizontal line. This marking became inseparable from the identity he crafted. One of the Zodiac's early letters included a line confirmed by handwriting analysts to be authentic: "I like killing people because it is so much fun." It matched the emotionless tone found throughout his messages: cold, direct, and designed to control public attention. Another letter, mailed in October 1969, threatened to attack a school bus, claiming he could shoot out a tire and pick off the children as they came bouncing out. This warning forced police to escort school buses and caused districts to temporarily change routes, all documented in reports and newspaper coverage. Witness descriptions across confirmed crime scenes were surprisingly consistent. A white male around 5'8" to 6'0", stocky with glasses and short hair. Survivors described him as calm and steady, never rushed, even in the middle of an attack. The most detailed account came from survivor Brian Hartnell, who said the attacker wore a black hood with the Zodiac's cross-circle symbol on the chest, later confirmed when the killer mailed a sketch of the same outfit. From 1969 to 1974, multiple agencies, including local police, the FBI, and the California Department of Justice, reviewed thousands of suspects. Handwriting samples, fingerprints, and ciphers were examined extensively. Some codes, like Z408, were solved early. Others, including the famous Z340, remained unsolved for over 50 years until cracked by private cryptanalysts in 2020 and verified by the FBI. Despite the massive investigative effort, every major suspect was eventually ruled out due to unmatched prints, handwriting differences, alibis, or inconclusive DNA. Partial DNA from stamps and envelopes helped eliminate suspects, but was too degraded to confirm any. By the mid-1970s, the Zodiac's letters stopped. No confirmed attacks followed. He vanished as suddenly as he appeared. Today, the case remains open, and even with modern forensic testing, the Zodiac's identity has never been confirmed. He remains one of America's most studied unidentified killers, remembered not through theories, but through the evidence he left behind. These cases aren't just eerie stories. They're investigations that stretched across decades and still ended without answers. 3 killers, 3 timelines, no justice, and the unsettling possibility remains. Some of these offenders may have lived ordinary lives afterward, working, aging, blending in, while knowing exactly what they'd done. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown informative, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts. Stay safe, stay aware. Some answers remain missing, and some stories never find an ending.